Baked ham, in my opinion, is the best part about Christmas Day, and it's the glaze that makes this so special. We will be concentrating on the ham, but obviously more on that sauce because that's what we want to make so good. And this right here is a double smoked half leg of ham that weighs 4.5 kilos or 9.9 pounds. So let's get straight into it. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Alright guys, starting us off with one of the main ingredients for our glaze, which is 1 bulb of garlic. We're going to place this into the center of a sheet of aluminium foil or tin foil, wrap it up nice and tight into a little Christmas parcel just like so, then place it onto a baking tray, make your way over to a preheated oven set to 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit and roast for 45 minutes or until soft. Once that's done, carefully remove the tray and place the garlic aside to cool down for 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, let's prep the rest of the glaze. So with 1 small brown or yellow onion, remove the tip, slice it in half and peel off the skin, saving the scraps for a stock. Then with the root still intact, make thin slices stopping just before the root, rotate it 90 degrees to make a horizontal slice through the middle, again stopping at the root, and come through with a knife to dice this into really small even sized pieces. Also make sure to trim off any excess flesh from around the root, and this can also be saved for a stock. Next up is 1 large lemon, which we want to slice in half and extract the juice either using a citrus juicer or your hands, but with whichever way you choose to do it, make sure none of those sneaky seeds make their way into that juice. Here we have 50 grams or 1.7 ounces of canned pineapple pieces, and all that's needed for this is a good old rough chop, but do try your best to get it at least the same size as the onion for a bit of consistency. Last but not least, let's unwrap the slightly cooled down garlic, and with this, lay it on its side, slice it in half, then with each half we can satisfyingly squeeze out that delicious soft garlic paste, which is good enough to eat on its own. Now to make the glaze, place a large saucepan over a high heat and add in 1.5 cups or 375 milliliters of cold water, 1 3/4 cups or 430 milliliters of pineapple juice, which is going to give sweetness and a great depth of flavor, half a cup or 125 milliliters of teriyaki sauce for a slight sweet umami richness, 1.5 tablespoons or 30 milliliters of soy sauce for a nice salty umami flavor, and 110 grams or 3.8 ounces of brown sugar to help caramelize as well as add depth. This can now be all stirred together, and whilst mixing occasionally, allow this to come to a boil, and once achieved, let's increase the flavour even more by adding in our roasted garlic paste, along with the finely diced onion, which will add a nice subtle sweetness and caramelization, the finely chopped pineapple for even more caramelization, the freshly squeezed lemon juice to cut back the sweetness with a little bit of acidity, 1/4 teaspoon or 0.2 grams of hot cayenne pepper for the slightest tingle on the palate, and for the final and main ingredient, 2.5 tablespoons or 50 milliliters of Tennessee whiskey, and I don't want to be copyright claimed, so if you look up Tennessee whiskey, you'll know what I'm talking about. Also, it adds the most incredible rich flavor and helps the glaze reduce into something very special. This can now be all mixed through to allow those flavors to become friends, then bring this back to a boil, reduce the heat to medium, and whilst mixing regularly, reduce for 40 minutes or until very thick. Now for the other star ingredient of this recipe, here is our 4.5 kilo or 9.9 pound double smoked half leg ham, which as you can see still has the bone intact, but don't worry if yours is boneless, this recipe still works for you. On the ham will be a very large piece of rind or skin, and this does need to be removed. The easiest and cleanest way to do it is locate the part where the rind connects to the fat and simply run your finger between it, making your way underneath the whole rind, but don't remove the fat layer underneath, as this is one of the best parts of this recipe. Also, don't worry if it looks difficult, because it really isn't, and it's actually one of the easiest steps in this recipe. Once you make it to the top of the joint bone, you can then continue to remove the rind around it, or you can gently slice around the whole thing to leave a cap on it, which will make it easier to move around later in the recipe. Either way you do it and the rind's been separated from the fat, let's then gently pull the rind off, exposing that fat layer, and to avoid wastage, you can roast the rind if you wish to do so for some nice little crackling pieces. Also, one part that I didn't mention on your ham, you'll more than likely have a browned off section which didn't have any rind on it, but make sure you don't remove this, as this is the exposed fat that's been smoked by your supplier. Now once that's complete, grab a small sharp knife and gently run it across the fat to score it, which will open it up once it's been baked, become crisp and allow for our glaze to make its way inside. Also slice the strips with a 1 to 2 centimeter gap between them and don't cut too deep, otherwise the juices will flow out and we won't have a slight crisp shell. Once that's done, that same method can then be applied going across our strips to create little squares or diamonds depending on which angle you decide you want to do it on. With that complete, place the ham onto its side into a large high-rimmed baking pan lined with parchment paper, pour in 3/4 cup or 180 milliliters of cold water to create steam and also a delicious flavoured sauce. Then cover tightly with 3 large sheets of aluminium foil or tin foil, making sure it's nice and tight and no steam can escape. Make your way over to a preheated oven set on 150 degrees Celsius or 300 degrees Fahrenheit and bake for 35 minutes undisturbed. Alright, so going back to our glaze that's been reducing for 40 minutes, you can see that it is reduced a lot and is now nice and thick with 3 C's. This can then be removed from the stovetop. After 35 minutes baking, the ham can then be removed from the oven and increase the heat to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Carefully remove the aluminium or tin foil, discarding as we no longer need it. Then now what we want to do is stand our ham up, placing it on the flat surface, and I do recommend you use tongs for this part. Now using a pastry brush, let's then get our delicious glaze and brush half of the glaze all over the ham, getting it completely covered and well coated. The little bits of onion and pineapple are great too, as they help give a nice caramel char which then takes the flavour to the next level. You can also just pour the glaze over the top, but if you do, please be careful it doesn't fall into the pan juices. Let's now take this back over to the oven, which is at 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit, and if you're like me, you might have to remove the bottom tray, seeing as our ham is now standing up. Once sorted, bake this for 15 minutes to slightly char that glazed surface, then carefully remove it from the oven again. Get back in there with the rest of the glaze completely coating and covering, and you can also reserve a little bit of that glaze to use as a serving sauce. One thing with this step, I like to gently tap the sauce on this time, just to be gentle with that fat, as I don't want any parts to accidentally peel off, and I also think it helps gain more coverage. Let's now go back over to the oven again and bake for another 10 to 15 minutes, or until the surface of the ham is beautifully golden and slightly charred, and once achieved, very carefully remove it from the oven, and you definitely don't want to be dropping this right now, and allow this beautiful beast to rest for 10 minutes. Once this has rested, we can now spoon over some of those pan juices, saving the rest for serving, and these juices add even more incredible flavour and literally make the ham glisten, as you can see here. After everything's done, use your sharpest knife to slice it open, revealing that delicious and juicy ham, and the best part about this is that after each slice, the glaze and pan juices recoat those individual slices, and as for serving it up, you can slice it as thin or as thick as you'd like, slice it beforehand and keep warm, or make your guests slice it themselves at the table. But with all that being said, we can then pat ourselves on the back for our great work and effort, and to make those efforts worthwhile, we can then dig in.